What's up, y'all, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today I'm going to be talking about Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is a mental illness, in case you didn't know, but I will address that here in a moment. And then I'm also going to be talking about The Act, which is a Hulu original based off of real events that do include that syndrome, and my own personal experience with somebody who did have Munchausen syndrome by proxy and Munchausen syndrome, and just kind of what happened in my life and what it might look like on a milder scale as opposed to The Act. I just kind of want to address all those things, but I think that the best place to start is with a definition. I have my lip gloss in my hand if you're wondering what that is. I don't know why, it's just like a fidget, but I'm gonna put it down now. But I think that the best place to start is just with a definition of Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So let's start with Munchausen syndrome because that's where the by proxy stems from. I have my notes. Munchausen syndrome is a mental disorder in which a person repeatedly and deliberately acts as if he or she has physical or mental illness when he or she is not really sick. It's associated with severe mental and emotional difficulties, so maybe that person has been through trauma, or maybe they have issues with anxiety and depression or PTSD or something along those lines that causes some emotional trauma or difficulties for them, and in turn they can develop Munchausen syndrome. And they can also develop Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is a mental health problem in which a caregiver makes up or causes an illness or injury in a person under their care. This could be a child, an adult, an elderly person, anybody with a disability, all people who are very vulnerable. And that being said, Munchausen syndrome by proxy can be considered abuse. That's just kind of the synopsis of what they are. I just want to clarify something about Munchausen syndrome really quickly because it does sound a lot like hypochondriosis. And if you don't know somebody who's a hypochondriac, they're basically just somebody who thinks they're sick all the time. Like every time you see them, they're like, oh, I have the flu. Oh, I have a cold. Oh, I have this. Oh, I have that. Oh, I think I'm getting this. Oh, I think I have a cough. Oh, I think I'm, allergic to this. That's just somebody who is, I guess, anxious about germs and becoming sick. They genuinely believe that they're sick. They genuinely believe that they're ill. And typically it's not something wild or life-threatening. They're little things here and there that happen to them, and all of a sudden they think that they're sick, but it is genuine, and they do believe they believe their illness to be true. However, somebody with Munchausen syndrome does not believe that they're sick. It's intentional. They're fake symptoms. It's called a factitious disease, or a factitious syndrome, which essentially means that they know that it's fake. They're faking it. They are doing it for sympathy or attention or money, or all three possibly. Munchausen syndrome is different because somebody with Munchausen syndrome will go through anything and everything, hell and high water, and they will go through the greatest lengths to convince people that they're sick. They will literally go to extreme lengths to convince people that it's true because they know that it's not. A lot of times you'll find that in Munchausen syndrome by proxy, it's usually for money or sympathy, because the person who has the Munchausen syndrome is not the person who's sick. They're not the person who's undergoing medical procedures. They're not the person who, has to really deal with anything. They just reap the benefits of what the other person has to go through. And that is what happens in The Act. I know the case of, I have this massive hole in my armpit, and I realized that after I put this on, but the outfit's cute, so I'm leaving it, and I don't really care. Just don't make fun of me, okay? So in The Act, I'm gonna be talking about what happens in The Act and basically the beginning to end of the actual story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her mom. There is a documentary, I believe it's on Lifetime or maybe the ID channel, called Mommy, Dad, and Dearest, which is very informational, and it gives you the whole plot line and everything that happens in this case. But I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of what it is. So the act is based off of true events. Whenever they say that, that means that there's usually things that are dramatized or a little bit extra compared to like what actually happened. But it's based off of something that actually happened. Can you stop? My kids are playing. Okay, so on June 14th, 2015, Dee Dee Blanchard was murdered by her daughter's boyfriend, her daughter Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Her boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn, murdered Dee Dee Blanchard in the middle of the night. Gypsy left with him. It was planned, and it was planned because Miss Dee Dee Blanchard, or Claudine Blanchard, had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and she projected all of these illnesses onto her daughter Gypsy. And for, I believe she was 19 when her mom was murdered, or maybe even older. So for 2 decades at least of her life, she was severely abused by her mother, and she was receiving medical treatments and procedures for things she didn't even have, like leukemia and asthma, and she was tube fed, and she was told that she had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old because of brain damage during birth and being a premature baby, which all of these things are not true. None of them. She was in a wheelchair. She could walk. None of it's true. And that's essentially what Munchausen syndrome by proxy is, because Dee Dee was doing all of these things. Hi, baby. Bye. See you later. Go away. Dee Dee was doing all of these things for fame, attention, money, all of the wrong reasons, you know? It's honestly, it's really sad. And if you want to know more about it, I would urge you to watch the act. There is a lawsuit, I believe, happening right now. I think that Gypsy Rose's family is actually trying to sue Hulu for the original. So watch it while you can, because I don't know if it's really going to be up for that much longer, but it is really good. And if you're looking for more of an accurate story versus the dramatized story that the act is, I would highly suggest that you watch Mommy Dead and Dearest. I guess her boyfriend is serving life in prison, and she is just serving a few years in a correctional facility. So, but it went from a completely disabled girl to her murdered mother and her in a correctional facility and her boyfriend in prison for life. So it's kind of crazy, but I would totally suggest watching it and learning about it yourself because it's very interesting. Okay, so now I'm going to get into my own personal experience with Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It's not me that has it, but I do know somebody and was fairly close to somebody for a number of years that did have it, and it affected my family rather heavily. In 2009, my younger sister had a traumatic brain injury. It in turn caused a lot of other health problems. That's a completely other story. I can do a complete different video on it because I do feel like it deserves its own video and she deserves her own video to be talked about. So I'm not going to provide a lot of detail about that right now, but just know that she suffered from a traumatic brain injury, and in turn there was a lot of other health issues. So when she came home, we had to have home health care nurses because my family, my parents and I couldn't provide for her what she needed without a medical professional. She came home, and obviously my parents and I are very naive. We're gonna take all the help we can get. Our lives just got flipped around, and things are very different. So we need somebody who knows what they're doing and knows what they're talking about. So we had an entire team of nurses, but there is one head nurse. And you'll find that in hospitals and in all of their home health care scenarios. There's always somebody called the charge nurse. And the charge nurse is in charge of your case. And they're in charge of, you know, the scheduling and probably all the paperwork, everything that's detailed and finite about your case is the charge nurse's responsibility, in addition to being at the home and taking care of the kid. For the sake of this video, I'm going to call her Mabel. That's not her real name, obviously, but I don't want to give that out because it's not my information to give. When we first came home, things were great. They were wonderful. As far as her care for my sister, because my parents and I didn't really know much. We knew what we had learned in the hospital, but it's very different in your own home. You don't have a button that brings the doctor and a team of surgeons into your room, you know? You're on your own, essentially, and our knowledge and my sister's health was in the hands of this team of nurses, and more specifically Mabel. For some time we really trusted her and believed her, and things were pretty much just fine and dandy. And then when I was probably, my sister got sick when I was 10, so when I was probably, I don't know, 11 or 12, she had her first seizure, which is really, in the whole of it, one of the lesser of her medical problems, but at the time it seemed very scary and overwhelming. So Mabel was always our shoulder to lean on, our person to, you know, make us feel better about those things. And so she started having seizures, and I remember once I was at a basketball game, my own basketball game, and my parents both had to leave because my sister had a seizure, and my dad came and he grabbed me and he told me that we needed to leave. He pulled me off the court, and we went home and we went straight to the hospital because it was one of the first seizures that she had ever had. And given that she had had a traumatic brain injury, it's hard to say what other problems could come along with that. So obviously we treated it as an emergency, but as time goes on, if you know anybody who does have seizures, they become less scary and they become less urgent, because there's really nothing that they can do for you at the hospital that you can't do for yourself or for your loved one once you have the proper medical the proper medical equipment like medicine and what have you. Obviously, we still had a lot of trust in Mabel because she had never given us a reason not to trust her. We did have some other crazy nurses, which is also another story time, but we'll hold on to those ladies for another time. If y'all want to hear that, let me know. I'd love to tell those stories. They're wild. Like I said, the urgency started to dissipate, and Mabel had MS, which is multiple sclerosis, and it's a nervous system disorder, if you will. It's a lot of pain caused by damage to your, I think it's your somatic sensory nervous system. It's damage to your nervous system, okay? And it can be very painful, and a lot of people can't walk or whatever. I just made it sound so casual, but it can be very painful and it can cause a lot of problems for people. But she did continue to work for us, and she had always had, since we had known her, she'd always had MS. So she really downplayed the severity of it, and it never really seemed to be a problem. Which, it's ironic because multiple sclerosis is MS, which is also the acronym for Munchausen syndrome. So that's ironic, but it's fine. So because Mabel had multiple sclerosis, she started to work nights, because working during the day is a lot more work for the nurses than working at night is. When you're a night nurse, you essentially sit in their room and just make sure that they don't seize, and make sure that you roll them so they're not laying on the same side all the time, and, you know, administering any medications that they may need and whatnot. So it's much less strenuous on the body to be a night nurse in home health care than it is to be a day nurse. So she started to transition into nights, and eventually she was one of our only night nurses. So we had to trust her a lot, and especially my mom, because she's trusting somebody whom she does know, but doesn't know that well, with her child and her child's life in the middle of the night. So my mom wasn't a very heavy sleeper as it was, but she did get woken up several times for emergency middle of the night trips to the ER for seizures or a high fever or just ridiculous things. And it got to this point where the other night nurses and the day nurses were like, I don't think that happens. Like, I don't think that she had a seizure, because my sister, her name was Haley. My sister would have a lot of fatigue, and she was very, I guess you could say, lethargic after a seizure. And there would be times when Mabel, I almost said her real name, when Mabel would tell my mom that she had had a seizure that night, when in reality, it wasn't, there was no evidence besides her saying that that had happened, that it actually did happen. And, you know, as time went on, my parents and I became more knowledgeable about my sister's health conditions and how to take care of her. For the most part, the effects of Munchausen syndrome by proxy with Mabel were just that she was always telling us that she had seizures, or that she had a fever, and she would put my sister in an ice bath, or she would send us to the ER for a seizure, or she would say, oh, she looks swollen, let's go to the emergency room. And my mom's like, Munchausen syndrome by proxy really couldn't take off to its fullest potential in my home, because my mom didn't let it fly. If she thought something was fishy, or she thought something wasn't happening or didn't exist, she would say something, and she wasn't shy about it, because she was very much an advocate for her child and for her child's health. I don't know if you've ever spent time in a hospital or in an emergency room, but if you've spent more than 24 hours there, you know how miserable it is. And if you can avoid going to the hospital, do it. Because, you know, it's miserable to go to the hospital, especially when you have people in your home that can care for you, like my sister did. We had home health care nurses. So my mom wasn't super keen on the idea of going to the hospital every time she had a seizure or had a fever or whatever, because she knew that we could care for her at home now. Which, granted, is very different than it was in the beginning, which is why she stuck around for so long, and why it took so long for that to come to the surface, because in the very beginning, my family was naive and we didn't know anything about anything. So we needed her, and we needed her to tell us what was wrong, and so she could make up anything, and we'd be like, yeah, okay, yeah, you're right, like let's go to the hospital, let's whatever, you know. And as time went on, and we became more knowledgeable and more focused in on the details of what those things looked like, or what you should really be doing in the case of those things, she kind of lost her control, and she lost the ability to project illnesses and injury onto my sister, because we called bullshit, and because we told her, and really it was my mom, because my mom was like, no, like that's not what's happening. And so as that started to happen, the Munchausen syndrome by proxy started to fade away, and the Munchausen syndrome itself started to become present. Just the Munchausen syndrome, where she projected illnesses onto herself for sympathy, or for attention, or for a free pass, or for whatever. So she started to miss work a lot, and my mom she still is a certified nurse's assistant, a CNA. So she could be at home with my sister and take care of her and get paid to do so. So when she did call out, while it was wildly inconvenient because my mom needed to sleep, it wasn't the end of the world, because my mom could take care of her, she could get paid for it. You know, it was what it was, but it became more and more frequent. She was missing more and more work all the time. And if it wasn't because her grandkid was sick, it was because her car got stuck in the snow, or because her car doesn't do good in the snow. It's just dumb excuses for things. And it was constantly about how her car didn't do well in the snow. In the winter, it was the worst. She would absolutely miss, probably, if she worked 5 nights of the week, she would miss at least 3 of those nights, at least. So it started to become an issue, right? And you know, there was always an excuse. There was always something that we should feel bad for her for, so that we couldn't get mad. One day, she tells my mom that she's been diagnosed with cancer. And I don't want it to seem like I don't think that cancer is a big deal, because I do think that cancer is a big deal, and I think that it's very scary for some people, and it can be very sad to watch somebody go through cancer. I've had several members of my family be diagnosed with cancer and go through chemotherapy, and it's very sad and it's very scary, and it can be very painful as well. So I don't want to downplay the severity of cancer, but I don't believe she really had cancer. And my mom and I have never believed that. And I don't think my dad has either. None of us have ever truly believed that she was really diagnosed with cancer. And here is why. Let me tell you why. Because, like I said, we've had several people in our family tree be diagnosed with cancer. And we've watched several people in our family tree go through the process of chemotherapy. And if you've ever watched somebody go through chemotherapy, you know what a miserable thing it is. You know how sick they are, how weak they are, how much in pain they are. And it's not a pretty thing to watch. It's really not. It's very sad. And after she had told us that she had cancer, she said she was undergoing chemo, she wasn't really losing any hair. And when she showed up to work, she looked pretty healthy. Her skin, you know, pink and flush, or I guess flush with pink, or full of color. Her face was never gray like somebody who's going through chemotherapy's face is. And like I said, she didn't really lose any of her hair. She just stopped dyeing her hair, which was something that was interesting. But she never really lost any of her hair. She would occasionally wear like a do-rag or something to cover her head so we couldn't see. But if she didn't wear it, if she wore it one night, she wouldn't wear it the next, and we'd see her full head of hair. So it was like, what? How are you going through chemotherapy and you still have a full head of hair? You have eyebrows, you have eyelashes, so all of it's still there. And pretty much immediately upon starting chemotherapy, you start to lose your hair. That's one of the first things to go. So after several years of all of this stuff, all of these things happening, her missing work, you know, the cancer thing, it would come and go. Which is, it can happen. It can happen. Somebody can be cancer free and then get cancer again. It's not unheard of. It does happen. But all of the times, no hair loss, healthy. You know, it was just, it was tired. We were tired. It was just, we couldn't do it anymore. When I was probably, I don't know, 16, my mom finally decided that we needed to switch charge nurses, and it was time for her to move on to another family or onto another career path, because she just wasn't meant to be in our home or a part of our team. Suddenly, after she was no longer a part of the team, my sister wasn't having seizures in the middle of the night anymore. She wasn't getting these super high grade fevers. These allergic reactions that she always said she was having, they weren't happening anymore. It was like gone, done. Like all of it went away. So I guess I should say, I have a couple things to say. I want to start by saying that I do believe that Mabel was a genuinely kind lady, and she was always very, very kind to my family and I. She's paid a lot of special attention to me because sometimes I had to take the back seat, or I was put on the back burner, because my sister did require a lot of attention, and a lot of medical attention, emotional, physical, all that kind of attention. She really needed it. Mabel tried to make me feel equal or special, if you will. She took me to see Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 when it came out in theaters. We saw the midnight premiere, which is really cool, and she was always so kind to me. She would let me spend the night at her house. She would take me to the pool. I would babysit her grandkids. I do have a spot for this lady in my heart. She was a big part of my life for several years, and I do think she's a good person. I just think she's a good person with mental health issues. And I also would like to say that I very clearly am not a doctor, and this is just through assumption and research that I can say that I do believe that she suffered from a milder version of Munchausen syndrome by proxy and Munchausen syndrome. And yeah, I mean, I don't really know how exactly to end this. If you have any questions, I would love for you to ask them, or if you want to see any videos about my sister or any other crazy nursing, at-home nurse experiences that we've had, I'd love to tell those as well. I'd love to talk about it. I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you learned something about mental illness, or at the very least, it gets you to watch The Act or Mommy, Dead, and Dearest. They're both very interesting if you're into true crime. I have a lot more stories where this came from. I've been through a lot of things in my life, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and share this with your friends, I guess. Talk about it. Watch The Act, watch Mommy, Dead, and Dearest, and be aware. Be aware of the people around you, and be kind to everyone, because you never know what they're going through, and maybe they don't know what they're going through either if they don't go to the doctor and get their mental health issues checked out. If you think you have mental health issues, see a therapist. I guess that about wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye!